I think we should. And introducing the next speaker, Dr. Gaurav Luthra, who is the president of the ARC at the IRSI. Dr. Gaurav Luthra is from Dehradun, doesn't need any introduction as well. But what some of you might not know about him is he's a fantastic tennis player as well. So Gaurav Luthra is
Thanks,
going to be
Praveen,
talking
and
to us
thanks.
about treating regressions.
Thanks, Praveen, and thanks, Dr. Chitra and the whole team for inviting me. And let me quickly start. I know you've given us so little time that we have to rush. Okay. So how do I tackle regression? Regression is a tendency of the eye to lose its original refraction and is dependent on several variables for that matter, but most importantly, the preoperative myopia and the amount of correction. And it's largely due to the epithelial remodeling and to some extent the stromal remodeling after laser refractive surgery, and also much beyond that. All refractive procedures have small differences in their regression rates and their long-term and short-term changes as well. But over a period of time, they tend to become pretty similar. And I actually, in my practice, like to differentiate regression from progression, which may happen due to increases in axial length. So we typically document axial length for all our patients for the last 10 years. And, the patients who have come back after 7-8 years with changes in refraction, and we found that it was due to increases in axial length. And then it becomes very easy to explain to the patient. So keeping records of all patients' axial length is great for yourself and for the patient to understand what's going on, whether it's a regression or a progression, and becomes easier to explain to them as well. Now, this was one nice study that I found, which checked out on the factors affecting long-term myopic regression after LASIK and comparing it to LASIK or surface treatments for moderate myopia. And here you can see that over a period of 10 years, they had divided their groups into the regression group and the non-regression group. And the first A is the LASIK group and B is the surface group. And you'll see that in both of them, it's pretty similar. And towards the end, they kind of match up. And it's about -1 to 1.25 is the total thing there. And similarly, if you look at astigmatism, you'll compare LASIK, femto-LASIK, and PRK. You'll obviously notice that PRK doesn't hold up that well for treating significant astigmatism. For small astigmatism, it's about the same. And LASIK tends to have 80% patients even after a few years, setting up well, and a little lesser for PRK, but I do PRK for astigmatism as well. And this shows you the corneal thickness changes over 10 years compared between LASIK on the left and PRK on the right. Now you'll see a huge change in the PRK. So it's typical that PRK will have more significant epithelial remodeling changes as compared to a flap-based procedure over here, which is LASIK. Now, coming on to a comparison between what we've been discussing, SMILE and LASIK, they stack up pretty much the same. So conclusion was they almost no difference was observed after 5 years, but a regression rate of about -0.02 plus minus 0.39 in the SMILE group and a -0.12 plus minus. So practically the same in a 5-year follow-up. So this is how, however, the epithelium would differentiate between LASIK and PRK. In LASIK, you can notice that the epithelium thickness changes are there and they reach a particular level. In surface treatments, obviously the epithelium will first be very thin and then it kind of comes up, and over a period of time you'll see that they come pretty close to each other. Now, why epithelium thickness mapping has become so important of late is because we understand refractive surgery so much better, and you can see that this epithelium is typically around 50 microns. And for patients who come in with regression, it becomes very nice to study the epithelium, because especially if you have the pre-op and the post-op epitheliums, and then you notice some changes happening, it's great to document this. We document it for every patient. Now you can see here the central epithelium being much thicker, and in the post-myopic ablation. Similarly over here, this is a typical myopic ablation, and you'll see how the epithelium forms a meniscus kind of thing over here. Compare that to a hyperopic ablation where the periphery will be, the guttering is there, and the steps are they're more steep. So typically hyperopia will have more changes in epithelium, both for LASIK and surface, but much more so for surface ablations. And rarely you'll have a surprise myopic epithelium with peripheral hypertrophy, and you will have a surprise and you might feel that you got a significant overcorrection. But if you check out the epithelium mapping, you'll typically know and you will not intervene immediately. Now, for our patients, what we typically do is we see our patients on day 1, day 15, 3 months, 1 year, and then we keep calling them, if possible, annually, otherwise at least once in 2 years, or report SOS. And what we check up on all follow-up visits is obviously the vision and the autoref, which really goes well.
1 minute.
We document the autorefs, the pressures. I would strongly suggest topography at 3 months and 1 year, if possible, and then SOS if required. I would prefer the Pentacam because it also gives you the corneal thickness profiles and you can monitor these patients well. And when we need to do, we would typically monitor the epithelium thickness, and we do an eye trace if possible if we notice a regression or a surprise. And we, of course, ask them for a peripheral retina exam, axial length, as I told you. So when to suspect regression? First month, it's more likely to be an undercorrection if you're getting some significant regression, but look at the epithelium. Try to put them patients on topical steroids. At 3 months, typically most patients will stabilize, and then on the annual visits, you can do an objective exam, or if the patient complains, sometimes they come after many years. However, you should always be on the watch out for ectasia, because in the first 2-3 years, if there's a patient reporting sudden diminution of vision, or if in the first place, they do definitely need follow-ups. And on AutoRef, if you see unexplained astigmatism, you can immediately be aware of something going on, immediately do a topography. This is a case which we had of a 40-year-old male, 18 years LASIK done elsewhere, came with diminution of vision for 1 year. And we noticed this ectasia in one eye and inferior steepening in the other eye. This is a long period after the surgery. And of course, the pentacam showed ectasia in one eye. Now, when we took a detailed history, he showed up history of rubbing of the eye for the last 1 year because of dry eye. He was having poor ocular surface. We did go ahead with the cross-linking, but the pearl was that post-LASIK ectasia may happen even many years after LASIK, and eye rubbing may be a cause. So please watch out for ectasia even 15 years after LASIK if a patient suddenly presents with one. Now, if you have a patient with documented regression, ask for a recent history of pregnancy. Excessive near strain. In the last 6 months, we've seen some of our patients who were stable for 10 years coming back with a lot of computer work and a lot of phone use and having a sudden change in their refraction. And this has been one factor. Look for lenticular changes, look for the axial length changes, look at the ocular surface, definitely do an epithelium mapping and a pentacam. Initially prescribe glasses or contacts. Don't jump to operate these patients with regression. Observe them for at least a year or so, and then decide what you would like to do. And most patients will understand that this is what they do. So counseling is very, very important. And enhancements, if you've planned, then you could be doing an early, intermediate, or a late enhancement. What's been popular in the past was to lift the flap, but I prefer to do surface treatments most of the times, unless there was a situation where you can do a flap lift. So when do I like to lift the flap? If it's your own operated patient, if your flap data is available, if there is an adequate residual bed, and if there have been no flap complications, and it's a recent previous surgery, and you have a good bed. Now, when we have a lift of the flap, you have difficulty identifying the flap edge if it's been there for a long time, but you can do that on the slit. And which flaps not to lift. If they're ultra thin flaps, 70 to 90 microns, especially if you have been documenting the flap thickness, if it's especially more than 6 months, if there was a flap complication, or if it's been a very, very long duration surgery and the edges are not clearly visible, especially the femtoflaps may be sticking very well. So early enhancements, please lift the flap, and you don't really need to do anything on the surface. Intermediate, which means a few years down the line, flap lifts are usually possible and predictable, but you might want to shift to the surface as well. And if you're doing enhancements after many years, I would preferably go to the surface, because flaps used to be very thick in the past, and some of these patients may have very thin beds, and flap complications may not be apparent over the years. And this is one patient who came up to me looking for a enhancement. She was a young lady, and she was going to get.
You'll have to conclude, Dr. Gaurav.
So let's go to the last slide. Summarizing. Early enhancements, you can lift the flap or maybe go on the surface if you have a flap complication. Intermediate, lift the flap or be careful about that. And if it's a late enhancement, please go to the surface. Surface enhancements are gaining more acceptance, and flap lift may be better only for the early first year enhancements if you would like to do them. Thank you. Actually, I didn't hear the call for the last minute. I heard the last minute, and then I didn't hear that the time's up. So I was waiting for the time's up to come around, and I'm sorry. We just
it's a thorough talk. Very good talk. I just want one question to the audience, to the panelists. Like, do you believe in giving anti-glaucoma medication for early regressions? And if so, how long would you want to give? Anybody on the panel, or even Gaurav would answer?
I don't do I'm aware of the fact that it was studied, but I don't do that.
Dr. Praveen?
Well, I do. In fact, there is a publication that talks about using iotim of all drops that actually seems to show that it tends to inhibit regression. But the effect seems to last only as long as you have the drop going on. So it's not something that is therapeutic. It probably is something that is maybe a little prophylactic to buy you a little more time.
I think what it does is it causes some drying and thinning of the epithelium, which reduces the amount of regression. And then this is what is seen, and once you stop it again, it kind of recurs. So generally, I don't use anti-glaucoma medication. Gaurav, I just wanted to know, do you routinely check axial lengths? Is it a good practice to measure axial lengths for all these patients?
That's exactly.
From the medico-legal point of view, to find out whether it is regression or true progression, because it's only the axial length which will tell you and save you also if the patient gets aggressive.
Absolutely. In fact, all our refractive surgery patients get their axial lengths documented at the time of surgery. And then, on follow-ups, if we notice a regression, potential regression or a change in refractive error, it really helps to document that. And patients typically would see that, and you can show them the data. It's very easy to explain to them that if you've had a progression, that it's not really a regression.
What is your take on the extra procedures for preventing regression? Because this was something that has not been covered, and I think there's a lot of it. There's a controversy on whether extra procedures prevent regression.
So I went through the data, and I thought it best not to cover because it's very controversial. And there are data showing both sides of the story. That Canelopoulos has of course shown data on hyperopic LASIK that doing extra procedures may prevent, but nobody else has been actually able to show that. And unless you have something to share, Sri Ganesh.
I think Pavel Studelka also has some data, and for hyperopia, I think it is useful because for hyperopia, it's both epithelial changes and biomechanical changes that cause the regression. So young patients whom you are doing hyperopic treatment above 2 diopters, then I usually crosslink, and I find that it is helpful from 2 to 4 diopters. If you crosslink them, then the amount of regression is less. So only for hyperopia I'm using, yes.
Okay, I'm paucity of time. We have to go on.